This is a May Luna Media production.
Welcome to the Synaptic Soul Podcast, where science meets spirit and they totally make out. I'm Ava Marie Anderson, your quantum-loving, spiritually savage bestie, here to prove your energy isn't mystical, it is measurable. And oh, quick heads up, if you hear snoring or grunting or a dramatic sigh mid-download, that is not a ghost in the machine. It's just my Frenchie co-hosts, Rocky and Rambo, vibing at their own frequency. Let's dive in. Let's start by naming the thing, because half the madness of the last decade came from not having the language for what we were living inside. So from roughly 2011 onward, we entered what I lovingly call the ocean years. Neptune, the planet of dreams and intuition and illusion and spirituality and compassion and collective consciousness, it moved into Pisces, the sign that it rules. And when a planet is in its home sign, it doesn't whisper. It saturates, it floods, and it dissolves the walls that you didn't even realize you were standing on. This wasn't a transit that asked for permission. It changed the atmosphere, and you didn't opt in. You actually breathed it in. Like, Neptune doesn't operate in straight lines. It doesn't care about your 5-year plan or your color-coded Google Calendar. Neptune works like water, slowly and persistently and invisibly. It erodes certainty, and it softens edges, and it makes things blurry enough that you are forced to feel your way forward instead of thinking your way through. And then Pisces is boundless. It's the sign of the ocean, of unity consciousness, of mysticism, of collective grief and collective compassion. So when Neptune moved through Pisces, reality itself became porous. Time got weird. Identity got weird. Truth stopped being obvious, and logic alone stopped working. This is why so many people say some version of, I don't recognize who I was before 2012, or my life cracked open around that time and never fully went back, because it wasn't supposed to. Neptune in Pisces was not about building, it was about dissolving, and dissolution is deeply uncomfortable when you are conditioned to equate stability with safety. This transit quietly dismantled false structures, not by blowing them up, but by revealing that they were hollow to begin with. So belief systems started leaking, and institutions lost credibility, and roles that we'd been playing for decades suddenly felt unbearable. Like, we weren't collectively being punished, we were all being deconditioned. So on a nervous system level, this mattered. So when certainty dissolves, the brain doesn't automatically go, oh yes, a spiritual awakening. It goes, why does nothing feel solid? And then prolonged ambiguity increases stress hormones and heightened sensitivity and pushes the system either toward hypervigilance or toward dissociation, which is why so many people oscillated between deep spiritual insight and total shutdown. Neptune opens perception, but it doesn't automatically give you regulation. So intuition came online faster than embodiment, and sensitivity expanded faster than capacity. Like, we were all feeling more and perceiving more and observing more without having the biological infrastructure yet to process it. And this is also why the language of energy exploded during this time. Like, people didn't suddenly become dramatic, they became aware. So when your perception widens, you notice subtleties that you previously filtered out, like the emotional undercurrents or collective mood shifts or trauma that wasn't just personal but ancestral. Neptune and Pisces blurred the boundary between mine and ours. Empathy intensified. Collective grief became unavoidable. Like, you didn't have to be watching the news to feel that something heavy was moving through the field. The body knew before the mind had words, and yet Neptune doesn't discriminate between truth and illusion. It dissolves both. That's the key. This transit didn't just awaken intuition, it also amplified fantasy and projection and confusion. So when the old map disappears, people grab whatever feels meaningful. And sometimes that's genuine spiritual connection, and sometimes it's escapism dressed up as an enlightenment. Neptune doesn't judge, it just reveals. It asks, can you tell the difference between intuition and avoidance? Between surrender and self-erasure? Between faith and fantasy? And a lot of us couldn't at first. And that's not moral failure, that's part of the initiation. Neptune strips away certainty so that discernment can be developed later. You don't learn discernment in clear conditions, you learn it through fog. And what made this era especially intense is that it wasn't happening in isolation. Technology accelerated it. Social media dissolved boundaries even further. Trauma became visible at scale. The collective nervous system was processing more information that it had evolved to handle, while simultaneously being asked to feel more deeply than ever before. Like, no wonder burnout skyrocketed. No wonder people question reality. No wonder so many spiritual awakenings came packaged with anxiety and grief and identity collapse. So, if you felt lost or untethered or overly sensitive or exhausted or like the rules of reality quietly changed sometime in the last decade, that wasn't personal dysfunction. That was atmospheric pressure. Neptune in Pisces rewired how humanity experiences meaning. It pulled us out of rigid materialism and into something far more fluid and intuitive and interconnected. But it didn't hand us a manual. It dissolved the old one and said, learn to feel your way through. Like, these were not years meant for mastery. They were years meant for remembering. Remembering that consciousness is not confined to the skull, that healing isn't linear, that identity is not fixed, that the nervous system is a spiritual organ, and that truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet knowing that you can't unsee. This was the awakening phase, messy and confusing and beautiful and disorienting, and also necessary. Alright, here's where I'm going to lovingly but firmly tell the truth. Not everything that happened during Neptune and Pisces was enlightenment. Like, some of it was awakening and some of it was avoidance. And for a lot of people it was both at the same damn time. Like, Neptune doesn't separate the sacred from the seductive. It dissolves the line and waits to see what you do without it. And that's why this era produced breathtaking spiritual openings and absolute nonsense masquerading as divine truth. It was just the same ocean, different swimmers. But let's start with the blessings, because those were real. This transit cracked open consciousness on a collective level. Like, meditation went mainstream. Trauma entered the conversation. Somatic healing replaced just think positive. Psychedelics moved from underground ceremonies into clinical research. People started talking about nervous systems and attachment styles and inner children and ancestral wounds and timelines and energy without whispering like they were committing a crime. This wasn't imagined. That was Neptune doing what Neptune does best, dissolving the illusion that humans are purely rational and isolated and mechanical beings. And from a neuroscience perspective, this all tracks. Practices like meditation and breathwork and psychedelics down-regulate the default mode network, which is that part of the brain associated with ego identity and rigid self-referencing. When that network quiets, people experience interconnectedness and insight and compassion and expanded perception. So, translation, the spiritual experiences people were having weren't fake. They were biologically observable shifts in perception. Science didn't invalidate the awakening. It explained how it happens. But, and here's where Neptune gets tricky, perception without regulation can feel like truth without grounding. So when intuition comes online faster than the nervous system's capacity to hold it, the psyche looks for relief. And relief doesn't always look like integration. Sometimes it looks like dissociation with good grounding. And this is where all that bullshit crept in. Like, spiritual bypassing flourished during this era because Neptune rewards transcendence. Floating feels better than pain. Everything is love and light feels better than sitting with grief and rage or terror stored in the body. Many people learned how to leave their bodies beautifully instead of learning how to live inside them safely. Dissociation got rebranded as higher consciousness. Avoidance got called non-attachment. Trauma responses dressed themselves up as divine downloads. And from a biological standpoint, this makes perfect sense. When the nervous system is overwhelmed and lacks regulation, it seeks states that reduce pain quickly. So dopamine-driven spiritual highs and peak experiences and ecstatic states that can feel like healing, but without integration, they become another coping mechanism. The system isn't awakening, it's escaping. Neptune doesn't stop you from doing this, it lets you learn the difference. This is also why cult dynamics and conspiracy thinking and savior complexes surge during this time. When old meaning structures dissolve and people feel ungrounded, the brain craves certainty. Absolute answers feel safer than ambiguity. Neptune dissolves truth and illusion, so without discernment, fantasy can feel just as real as insight. And when empathy is high but boundaries are low, people are more susceptible to projection, like onto leaders and ideologies and spiritual figures or imagined enemies. And again, this wasn't because people were weak or stupid, it was because the ground was foggy. Another shadow of this era was empathy burnout. Like Pisces dissolves the boundary between the self and the other, Neptune amplifies sensitivity, so together they made it nearly impossible not to feel the collective pain of the world. Like many people internalized suffering that they couldn't metabolize. They became healers who never learned how to rest, or caretakers with empty reserves, and light workers who forgot that they had bodies that needed sleep and nourishment and limits. Like compassion without containment becomes self-abandonment, and Neptune and Pisces forced us to see that, and yet, here's the thing that matters most. This was a part of the awakening, not a deviation from it. You don't learn discernment in clarity. You learn it in confusion. Like you don't learn embodiment while floating. You learn it after realizing that floating can't sustain a life. Neptune in Pisces wasn't meant to be a permanent state. It was meant to be an initiation, a mass remembering followed by a necessary reckoning. Like this era asked a brutal but sacred question. Like, is this spirituality helping you inhabit your life more fully or helping you avoid it more elegantly? And for many of us, the answer changed over time. What once felt liberating eventually felt hollow, and what once felt mystical eventually felt dysregulating. And that wasn't failure, that was evolution. The nervous system started demanding truth over fantasy. The body started vetoing beliefs that couldn't be lived, and the fog began to thin. So, if you look back on the last decade and you cringe a little, like at what you believed and who you followed and how far you floated, good. That means integration is happening. Awakening without humility calcifies into delusion. Awakening with reflection turns into wisdom. Neptune gave us the vision. Now it's asking us to develop discernment, because the next phase doesn't reward escapism, it actually rewards embodiment. This is the part of the episode where I want you to unclench your jaw and drop your shoulders and hear this clearly. If your life unraveled sometime in the last decade, you didn't miss the lesson. You were the lesson. Neptune in Pisces was never here to help you optimize a life built on misalignment. It was here to quietly dissolve anything that couldn't survive truth. And Neptune doesn't give a shit how much effort you put into something if it was never real to begin with. And this is why so many people experienced what looked like chaos but felt inevitable. Like relationships ended that you swore were forever. Careers you worked your ass off were suddenly empty. Identities that you built for survival stopped fitting. Dreams that you chased lost their shine. And the most disorienting part is that you often couldn't articulate why. Like there was no dramatic villain or no clear betrayal or no single moment that you could point to and say that's when it broke. It just stopped working. That's Neptune. That's the ground dissolving underneath you while everything looks the same from the outside. And from a biological perspective, identity collapse is not pathology. It's reorganization. So when a long-held identity no longer matches the lived experience, the nervous system experiences stress because coherence is lost. Your system is designed to seek congruence. When your inner truth and your outer life diverge too far, something has to give. Neptune doesn't force collapse. It removes the illusion that was holding all the things together. What falls apart under Neptune was already hollow. And this is also why grief was such a dominant theme during this era, even for people who didn't have anything to grieve. Like, you weren't just mourning people or situations, you were mourning versions of yourself. The self who believed hard work guaranteed safety, or the self who thought love meant endurance, or the self who trusted the institutions and the timelines and the promises that quietly failed. Grief is not just emotional, it is neurological. It is the process by which the brain updates reality. And Neptune demanded massive updates. Like, many people experience what mystics call the dark night of the soul, but without context, it felt like depression and burnout and existential freefall. Like, meaning dissolved and motivation vanished and old rewards stopped working. This wasn't because you were broken. It was because your psyche could no longer be bribed with illusions. When meaning structures collapse, the nervous system initially panics, but panic isn't that final state. It is the bridge. And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Like, Neptune doesn't just dissolve external structures, it dissolves the coping mechanisms. The ways that you numbed or distracted or overperformed your way through life stopped working. Like, alcohol hit harder. Hustle felt emptier. Relationships couldn't mask loneliness. Achievement didn't soothe the nervous system anymore, and that's not cruelty. It's an initiation into authenticity. Neptune removes the anesthetic so that healing can actually occur. And yes, this phase was brutal for sensitive and intuitive and empathic people, which, spoiler alert, is most of you listening. So when your perception widens but your containment hasn't caught up with everything yet, it all feels like too much. Like, you feel exposed and raw and unprotected, but what was actually happening was a recalibration. Your system was learning a new threshold for truth, one that can't be negotiated away by denial. And this is also why so many people changed direction entirely during this era. Like, left marriages, left religions, left cities, left versions of themselves that their families preferred. Neptune and Pisces didn't reward loyalty to anything that required self-betrayal. If something demanded that you abandon your intuition, your body, and your integrity to survive, it eventually collapsed. Not because you failed, but because you outgrew the lie that it was sustainable. And here's the reframe I want you to take into your bones. Collapse under Neptune is not destruction, it is extraction. What was false fell away. What was performative lost energy. What was misaligned stopped being supported by the field. And then what remained, even if it was just a quiet knowing, that was real. So if you felt like you were wandering without a map, good. Neptune was teaching you to navigate by inner orientation instead of external validation. If you felt stripped down, good. You were being relieved of identities that you no longer need to carry. And if you felt like everything paused and stalled or went into limbo, also good. Integration doesn't happen at speed. This era wasn't asking you to rebuild yet. It was just asking you to stop pretending. And now we get to talk about the shadow of all that sensitivity and compassion and openness and why boundaries became the missing piece. This is the part of the Neptune and Pisces story that doesn't get nearly enough airtime, mostly because it makes people uncomfortable. And Neptune hates discomfort. But if we're going to talk about integration, like real, embodied, nervous system honoring integration, we have to name this clearly. The last decade didn't just awaken compassion. It also quietly trained a lot of people to abandon themselves in the name of being loving or spiritual or evolved. Like, Pisces dissolves boundaries and Neptune amplifies whatever it touches. So together, they made sensitivity feel like a moral requirement, even if you were empathic and intuitive and emotionally attuned or trauma aware, you likely absorbed the unspoken message that feeling everything was part of your goodness. That if you could just understand more and forgive more and hold more and love harder, things would heal. But compassion without containment isn't enlightenment. It's nervous system overload. And from a biological standpoint, empathy is not infinite. The human nervous system evolved for connection and protection. So when boundaries dissolve for too long, the system stays in a state of hyperarousal, so constantly scanning and absorbing and responding. Cortisol rises, sleep suffers, immune function drops, emotional resilience thins, and instead of feeling open-hearted, you feel exhausted and resentful and numb or quietly enraged. Neptune doesn't stop this from happening, it reveals the cost. This is why empathy burnout became such a defining feature of the era. People who felt deeply didn't just care, they carried. They carried partners who wouldn't heal themselves, and families who wouldn't change, and systems that refused accountability. Collective grief had nowhere to land, basically. And many listeners are going to recognize this pattern instantly. Being the emotional regulator in every room and the healer in every relationship and the one who understands while their needs quietly evaporate. And here's the uncomfortable truth Neptune forced us to confront. Like, compassion without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Pisces energy is unconditional. That's beautiful and dangerous. Unconditional love without discernment turns into martyrdom. Like, spiritual teachings about unity and oneness were often interpreted as instructions to tolerate harm and to minimize red flags or to override the body's signals. It's all love became a way to ignore anger. Everything happens for a reason became a way to bypass grief. We're all mirrors became a way to excuse bad behavior. Neptune didn't create this, it just exposed it. And on a nervous system level, boundaries are not a personality trait. They are a psychological function. They are a physiological function. They're how the body distinguishes between safe and unsafe, self and other, and past and present. So when boundaries are chronically overridden, emotionally and energetically and relationally, the system doesn't become more spiritual. It becomes dysregulated. And people mistake dysregulation for sensitivity and intuition and even psychic ability when in reality the system is just flooded. This is also where codependency flourished under spiritual language. If overgiving felt righteous and overfunctioning felt purposeful and being needed felt like meaning. Like, Neptune and Pisces blurred the line between service and self-sacrifice so thoroughly that many people didn't realize how deeply they'd abandoned themselves until their bodies forced a reckoning. Like, burnout wasn't a glitch, it was feedback. And yet, and this matters, this wasn't a mistake. This was part of the initiation. Neptune showed us what happens when love is ungrounded, when empathy lacks structure, and when spirituality isn't integrated into biology. You don't learn healthy boundaries by being told about them. You learn them by crossing your own and feeling the consequences in your bones. This era taught a brutal but sacred lesson. You can be compassionate and boundaried at the same time. You can care without carrying. You can love without losing yourself. You can be spiritually open and biologically protected. Pisces energy without structure dissolves into chaos, but Pisces energy with containment becomes wisdom. And what's happening now and why so many people feel a shift is that the nervous system is no longer willing to participate in self-abandonment dressed up as enlightenment. The body is demanding honesty. It's vetoing beliefs that require exhaustion, and it's asking for spirituality that can be lived, not just believed. The shadow of Neptune and Pisces wasn't sensitivity. It was the belief that sensitivity required self-sacrifice. And this next phase, the one that we're stepping into now, it's about reclaiming agency and structure and embodiment without losing the heart that we just cracked open. Because the awakening wasn't meant to break you. It was meant to teach you where you end and where responsibility truly begins. Here's where the energy changes and why so many of you can feel it in your bones, even if you can't quite articulate it yet. The fog is thinning. It's not disappearing overnight, but it's thinning enough that direction is becoming possible again. Like, Neptune in Pisces was never meant to be a permanent state of being. You were not supposed to live dissolved forever. You were supposed to visit the ocean, remember something ancient and true, and then come back to land with wet hair and a different nervous system. And this is the pivot point. We're moving from awakening into embodiment. So for over a decade, the collective emphasis was on perception. seeing more and feeling more and remembering more. The veils thinned and intuition sharpened and meaning expanded beyond the purely material. But perception without integration eventually destabilizes the system. And biology always wins, by the way. The nervous system doesn't give a fuck how spiritually evolved your beliefs are. It cares whether your life is livable. And that's why the next phase isn't asking you to awaken further. It's asking you to act differently based on what you already know. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up. They think that the work is to keep absorbing and more teaching, more practices, more downloads, more insight. But that was the Neptune phase: absorption and dissolution and saturation. The phase we're entering now is about structure and agency and responsibility, not in a punitive way, but in a grounded way, in a can your body actually hold this frequency day after day kind of way. And from a nervous system perspective, embodiment means coherence. It means that your beliefs and your behaviors and your biology are all aligned. It means that you're not constantly overriding your body in the name of spiritual ideals. It means that intuition informs action, not avoidance. It means that regulation becomes more valuable than revelation. And this is where science and spirituality stop arguing and they start collaborating in a more meaningful way. Like, neuroscience backs this shift completely. Lasting change doesn't happen through insight alone. It happens through repetition and safety and integration. Trauma isn't healed by understanding it. It's healed by creating new lived experiences of safety in the body. And the same is true for the spiritual awakenings. If it never makes sense into how you relate and work and rest and choose and say no, then it all just remains theoretical. Beautiful, but unsustainable. And this is why so many people are suddenly uninterested in spectacle spirituality. Like, the flashy stuff doesn't land the same. The nervous system is matured. It wants truth that works on a Tuesday afternoon when you're tired and not just during a ceremony or a peak experience. It wants practices that stabilize, not destabilize. It wants spirituality that supports your human life, not one that requires you to escape it. And let's be clear, embodiment is not less spiritual, it's just more honest. This phase is about choosing relationships that don't require self-abandonment and building lives that support regulation, not constant activation, and honoring both intuition and logistics and integrating that mysticism with biology, letting your values show up in your calendar and not just in your journal. This is where sovereignty comes online, not the loud performative kind, but the quiet kind that knows when to leave and when to rest and when to speak and when to stop explaining. Neptune and Pisces cracked us open to unity. The next phase teaches us how to be individual again without losing that connection. So if the last decade was about remembering that we're more than our bodies, this chapter is about remembering that the body is sacred too. That regulation is a spiritual practice. That boundaries are not walls, they're containers that allow love to exist without leaking everywhere. That being grounded doesn't make you less intuitive, it makes your intuition usable. So if you felt that subtle but persistent pull towards simplicity and structure and boundaries and practicality lately, that is not you losing your magic. That's your magic, learning how to live here. Because you're not meant to hover above life forever. You're meant to inhabit it differently than you did before. The awakening happened. The remembering happened. And now comes the part where you build a life that can actually hold it. So here we are, just about on the other side of the ocean years, a little wet and changed and salt-stung and carrying memories that we don't always have the language for, but knowing deep in our bodies that something fundamental has shifted. And this is the part that doesn't get romanticized enough. Like, awakening doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with choices. Small ones, boring ones, repetitive ones. The kind that don't look spiritual on Instagram, but quietly rewire your life. Living awake is not about staying in awe. It's about staying present. Neptune and Pisces taught us how to dissolve. What comes after teaches us how to choose. And choosing, it turns out, is the real initiation. Choosing rest when your old identity thrived on exhaustion, or choosing boundaries when you're conditioning equated love with endurance, or I don't know, choosing regulation over intensity, choosing truth over fantasy, even when fantasy feels more comfortable. And here's the thing most people don't want to hear. You don't integrate an awakening by thinking about it. You integrate it by letting it change your behavior. Biology demands receipts, and the nervous system doesn't give a shit what you believe. It cares about what you repeatedly experience. That's why the question now isn't what do you know, it's how are you living differently because of what you know. This is where discernment becomes sacred. Discernment is intuition with boundaries. It's the ability to feel deeply without drowning, to care without carrying, and to sense without spiraling, to stay open and protected. Discernment is what Neptune withheld until the very end because it can't be taught in theory. It only emerges after confusion has done the work. Like living awake doesn't mean that you stop chasing peak experiences and you start valuing coherence. It means that you notice when your body tightens around a yes and relaxes around a no. You honor that signal even when it disappoints somebody. You stop overriding your nervous system in the name of growth, and you let healing be incremental instead of dramatic. You build rhythms that your body trusts. You realize that enlightenment doesn't look like transcendence, it just looks like safety. And yeah, I get it. It can feel anticlimactic at first. Like after years of intensity, simplicity can feel strange. Quiet feels suspicious. Stability can feel boring. But that's just your system recalibrating. You spent years in expansion. You had multiple spiritual awakenings, one after another, breaking you open. And now you're learning containment. Containment isn't a cage, it is a vessel. Without it, nothing sacred lasts. And this is also where responsibility comes in. Not blame, but responsibility. Response-ability. The ability to respond consciously instead of react unconsciously. Awakening gives you awareness. Embodiment gives you agency. This is where spirituality stops being something that happens to you and starts becoming something that you participate in daily, in how you communicate, and how you work, and how you love, and how you rest, and how you say no without needing a dramatic justification. The real magic of this phase is that it's quieter but sturdier. Like, you don't need to prove how evolved you are. You don't need to explain your healing. You don't need to convince anybody of your awakening. Your life starts to speak for you. Your nervous system becomes the authority. Your body becomes the oracle, and then suddenly you're not chasing meaning, you are living inside of it. So if Neptune and Pisces taught us anything, it's that consciousness is vast and mysterious and far bigger than we were ever taught. But what comes next teaches us something equally important, that consciousness chose to inhabit a body for a reason, to experience limitation and choice and relationship and repair and joy and grief and love and Tuesdays and dishes and boundaries and breath and these two little Frenchies laying in my lap right now. You were never meant to stay dissolved. You were meant to return, changed. So if you're feeling less enchanted by the fog and more drawn to what's real and practical and embodied and sustainable, trust that. You're not regressing, you are integrating. The awakening already happened, and now you get to live from it. And that honestly is the bravest part. And if this intro landed, share it with somebody who has lived through the ocean years and still wonders if they imagined it, because you didn't. You're not behind. You are right back on time, and guess what? Welcome back to land. You have been listening to the Synaptic Soul podcast, where science meets spirit and they totally make out. If this episode hit your frequency, do me a favor, rate it, review it, and share it with your fellow quantum weirdos. It helps the wavelength reach more souls. And if you caught a little snoring, that wasn't a portal, just my Frenchies Rocky and Rambo offering background blessings. Music is Cheat Code by 1,000 Hands, used under Creative Commons. And I am Ava Marie Anderson. Stay weird, stay wired, and keep making out with your higher self.